All right. All right, Derek, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Comprehensivist Wednesday, and we do this in cooperation with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, with lots of thinking members in it. So I'm always delighted to be doing stuff with them. Next time, 1 week from now, CJ is going to be back, and then Sanjay will be back. So we are really looking forward to that. Today is going to be special. We're going to be talking about cognition. And Derek is going to introduce 4 topics to us. Okay, he's going to give short introductions to each of the topics. He's going to raise some questions. And then we're going to have 4 breakout rooms for those 4 topics or 4 questions. They'll be all facilitated. You can go to any breakout room you choose. We will do 3 rounds of discussions, 20 minutes each. So we get to discuss 3 out of these 4 questions. If you really like a question, you can keep going back to the same room and discuss it even more. Okay. Or you can keep switching rooms. Okay. That you have the ability to do that. After which we're going to come back and we're going to do a lightning round. We're going to raise all the questions, biggest questions that we have on our mind, and then we're going to try to answer all of them as best as we can. All right, so that's the program. So Derek, floor is yours.
Okay, so tonight we have a few questions referring to and discussing how different other aspects of life, philosophical concepts, emotions, feelings, things, how they interact with cognition. So for starters, I think we should start with a definition of cognition. So I'm going to go ahead and go with what the Oxford University Press has to say for it in the Oxford Dictionary, which is that it is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. So overall, the way that you could think of it as is cognition is how we process what we've learned into what we know, and then how we use what we know to make decisions that guide our behaviors and our beliefs and the way that things are constantly evolving in our model of the world.
Can you repeat the definition one more time?
Sure. So cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses.
Thanks.
So, to the questions. And again, these questions that I've come up with, they're not questions that have like an exact right answer. They're questions that are meant for everyone to be able to weigh in on and have their own interpretations of. So don't consider anything I'm about to say as set in stone. I'm happy to have feedback and pushback. So the first one, what are the similarities and differences between intention and attention? And is one of those chicken and the other egg? As in, so does one cause the other? So I'm thinking that the best way that I found to be able to try and consider this question of the difference between intention and attention is to first consider their similarities, and then as you consider their similarities, it allows you to kind of flesh out the differences. So for instance, one of the things regarding both intention and attention is that they're what we would call convergent processes. So when I say convergent, what I mean is that, like, take attention, for instance. So you're constantly presented with more things than you can pay attention to in your environment. And what the actual act of attending is of taking all of these things and converging on a specific thing, eliminating the other distractors, and then deriving whatever sort of meaning or inference you need to, whatever observations you need to from that thing in the environment, from that stimulus in the environment. So when I thought about this question, what I realized is that both attention and intention are both convergent. So with intention, instead of having an array of stimuli that you can deal with in your environment, you have an array of possible courses of action, possible behaviors. And what intention is about converging on a specific action out of the array of possible ones that you could take in your life. And so, like there's in the attentional research that I actually, when I was in grad school, we had a class on attention. And one of the things that we discussed was like, what is attention in the beginning? And I love, there was this one statement that was made by, I think, Anne Treisman, who was a really big attention researcher, that you can think of attention as the glue that holds your perceptions together. So when you pay attention to an object in the world, it's like what your brain first sees is just all of the different basic characteristics of it. Its color, how many vertical and horizontal lines it's made of, what those intersect into. And then your brain is gluing all that into something that you can think of as a stable object that you're attending to. And I would say that in a lot of ways, intention does the same thing. So now I'm going to break it down even further. So before I was saying possible courses of action, well, even more than that, you can think of it as the glue that holds the pieces of each action. So if you have an action, you can break that up into a process of carrying out a behavior, and that your intention glues all of these different sub-steps of this process together. It might be like subroutines, like, when you're cooking and you intend to do one thing and then another and another and another, well, that intention kind of glues all of these sub processes into cooking. I've decided to cook, and now my intention is guiding me along this glued together pathway. So with that in mind, because it's convergent, another one of the things that both intention and attention, so again, this is also getting to the differences between attention and intention, is that attention seems to be mostly about sort of like a bottom up, where you have like the sensory level, things are coming up from your senses, and then you're gluing them together into perceptions that you're using to better understand the world. And with intention, you have these thoughts that are up in your head, and you're kind of bringing them down into your body and embodying some sort of action through your intention. So because of this convergent property that both of these things have, you could say that both attention and intention induce stability in your life. So as you converge on a specific thing to be able to attend to it in the world, as you converge on a specific action in order to enact it with your body, both of these things give you a more stable, either like your behavior will become more stable, you'll be able to guide yourself from one thing to another in a meaningful course of cause and effect, or the way that your mind is taking in information, processing the world around you, becomes more stable as you begin to converge. And a good way of thinking of it is sort of the signal noise analogy, of that if the things you don't need to attend to, or the things that you don't need to intend to, are being deselected, that you're getting rid of them, you're clearing out the noise in your head or the noise in your environment to be able to focus in on the signal, which fundamentally is the coherent message that matters, is one way of interpreting signal. And then another thing about intention and attention is that both of them involve valence. So what is valence? Valence is a word like in equivalence. Some two things are equivalent whenever they have equal valence. And what we think of in cognitive science is that valence is the positive or negative relevance of something in relation to a goal. So basically, in the case of attention and intention, fundamentally, both of these are about how you're going to behave, right? Like your thinking is all about, it tends to all be about formulating like a model of the world that's involved in how you're going to behave or what you're going to do right away. And so both of those things is kind of the attention feeds that model, and then the intention is what comes out of that model. And in a lot of cases, it's going to be, well, we have a goal. The model has been designed to help us figure out a goal. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be using these two dynamics to be able to, we're going to use, actually, let me try and think about the best way to put it. We're going to use valence as kind of a currency for evaluating how we're doing whenever we're attending to things and making and formulating intentions for things. And at the end of all of this, what you have is that you're directing your consciousness. With attention, it's that you're finding inputs for the direction of your consciousness. And for intention, you are selecting and converging on an output for your consciousness in order for you to continue. And when you're in a flow state, I mean, this is kind of coming to me as I'm saying it. I only wrote down a very short amount of things, but in a flow state, you could almost say that intention and attention are like almost seamlessly interlinked. Like what you could think of as a flow state is almost kind of like a superconductive state where there's no resistance between you paying attention to something and it directly influencing your intentions. So it's kind of I think that's a good place to end on, is that finally that the flow state is kind of this point where attention and intention are kind of contiguously free flowing between each other.
Wonderful. That was actually excellent. It's, it kind of puts everything down and it's kind of open-ended. And I really would love to see what people have to say about attention and intention. So that's going to be the first room is going to be on attention and intention. All right, let's go and describe the second room.
Okay. So the second room, and I'm not sure if this is the second room, this is just the order that these were in my notes, is how do we outsource cognitive work into our environment? Are tools for cognition different from tools for physical work? This is something that has become really prominent recently in a realm of cognitive science called cognitive ethnography. So it's kind of like cognitive, I think it's kind of like what they call ethography, which is where you observe animals in their natural habitat. And so what cognitive ethnography is about is watching people in their natural habitats. This being not dropping a person naked in the middle of the jungle, but dropping a person completely clothed in their normal work clothes in the middle of their job, and then just seeing, when you observe them, what do they do? And what they rapidly realized by doing this was that there's tons of ways that we sort of bake our thinking into the objects in our environment. So a great example of that would be something as simple as the way that a supermarket is laid out. You go to the supermarket, and what do you see? Well, you've got a bunch of aisles. The aisles are generally going to be parallel with the cash registers. Each aisle is going to have certain items on it that should make some sort of sense in terms of that they can either be used together, they're all the same type of item. So a lot of what you do when you go to the supermarket is you're able to kind of offload some of the extra logistics of worrying about what you're shopping for by just going down the aisles. And even the aisles themselves kind of inform you as to, well, when you're done on these aisles, you just file down the aisles to the cash registers, because that's where you're going to check out. In fact, my father, whenever my grandmother was getting older and needed help shopping, she would send him to the store with a list of things to get. And her shopping list, it blew my dad's mind. It would be listed so that as he walks through the store, he would get each of the things. Like it was perfectly designed so that as he walks through the store, because that's how my grandmother thought of things, because the scaffold, this way that we're able to offload our cognition into the environment, was so internalized into the way that she can think about things. And we do this a lot. I mean, like a really good example of this would be an abacus. Um, an abacus is a way that you can do really complex mathematical calculations without using any electricity. You're just using a simple um, method of sliding these beads on one of these arrays, and it allows you to manage really huge quantities really fast. And people can even take these abaci and internalize them into their head and use them in their head. And like you'll see people who can do this, they'll do this thing with their fingers where they still have the motor motion that helps them and kind of again scaffolds that process. So let's say, okay, what are some different things that we can think of as tools for cognition versus tools for physical work? Well, I mean, I would say that one very a good example of a tool for cognition that isn't a tool for physical work um, would be something, and again, there's kind of like, there's a fuzzy boundary between these two, would be something like a paper and pencil or a computer. Um, Obviously, you could say, well, writing is physical work, but it's like, we're talking about work that achieves things in the professional world, in the environment, in a meaningful, impactful way. Um, so things like paper, pencil, a computer, um, all these things we could think of as being able to multiply our cognitive labor, to be able to kind of crystallize. Like, I remember there was one time I was talking with a programmer and I was like, really you can think of programming as crystallized logic. That it's like this way that you're able to take a logical process and then just freeze it and be able to replay it over and over again as many times as you want. And I've heard a lot of people refer to technology as like fundamentally a multiplier of labor. I think that's a really great way of putting it. And I think it'd be really interesting for us all to think about the ways that we are multiplying our labors. Like a good, and this kind of gets into something with social media, which I'm just trying to break down the topic, so I won't get too deep into that. But with social media, for instance, a lot of people are worried that people are multiplying their cognitive labor in counterproductive ways. So they're multiplying their ability to engage in social comparisons. They're multiplying their ability to weigh up what they have versus what other people have, or to worry about their reputation. They're taking their reputational processing and they're dramatically accelerating the rate at which they can process their reputation by looking at likes and retweets and all that sort of stuff. And so we could think of that as one way in which we can see some distinctly cognitive tools being used for good and for bad. Um, so another sub question that I have in this, and I guess while I'm at it though, I will say that like a simple tool that we could think of that we don't think of as being a cognitive tool would be something like a hammer, something that can basically just multiply our capacity to do things physically. But at the same time, a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So it's like the way there's kind of this interesting connection between the way that we use tools for physical work and how it makes us think about our environment, how it makes us think about ourselves and what we're capable of. Because to some degree, the tools that we have are an extension of us because they define what we're capable of. Now, a question that came to mind for me from this question was, has technological advancement transformed tools for cognition more or less than tools for action? That's a complicated question that I don't feel like I even really scratched anything more than the surface of. That would be an interesting one to maybe get into, but just as one thought on that, I've thought that as technology has become more sophisticated, what we've tend to see is that tools and innovations that were innovating physical work began to give way to innovations for computational work. So back whenever, I can't remember what they call it off the top of my head, but basically what they were able to use to process cotton much more fastly, a motorized cotton mill, basically.
Cotton.
Cotton gin, yes, that's what they call them. Thank you, Shrikant. So the invention of the cotton gin, that was considered really revolutionary at the time, whereas now we're revolutionizing algorithms. And it's like, so we had this transition where initially it was like, oh wow, now we can separate cotton from the husk much more quickly. And then we had something like a printing press. And a printing press, I would say, is starting to err more into helping with cognition and helping with computation, instead of just physical work. I mean, yes, the printing press lets you print way more than you could just write, than you could print with your hand, which was a revolution. But also it allows you to, again, sort of crystallize a thought onto a piece of paper much more quickly and disseminate that information much more quickly, which you could think of as like a form of group cognition, where you're bringing everyone onto the same page. And then another question for this is, are psychoactive drugs tools for action, tools for cognition, both, or neither? And so on that note, a few thoughts I had about that are that psychiatric medication changes how we behave and how we feel about those behaviors. So, whenever you take an antidepressant, you might feel a lot better about what you are actually doing in your life. And that might change the way that you're going to do things. But it's really that it's the thought process about that. It's changing the thought process that changes the way you're doing those things. So I'd say in that way, you'd probably say it's more of a tool for cognition. But then some drugs improve physical performance. So, I mean, like, that's the question, is something like creatine or caffeine, some of these supplements that athletes take, would that go more under the side of being a tool for physical action or a tool for how you think? Maybe we could say that some of these things can be applied in multiple ways to physical work, and both to physical work and to cognitive work, because you can also use caffeine to get more done in the office. And then also some drugs potentiate impulsivity, some drugs reduce cravings. And so I would say that's more fundamentally cognitive, and that's about kind of modulating how you feel about what you can consume in the world around you and how you want to act on that. So, and that's, I think, all I have to say about that particular question.
Excellent. That's a huge topic. We had this gentleman called Merlin Donald here, who writes about kind of advent of cultures, and he identifies external memory. He calls it external memory as being crucial to development of culture. So he looks at all of these things as external memory. You're taking something that was going on inside and you are imprinting it outside, and it serves you, whether it is in writing or how you arrange your house or how you put together a grocery store. You're identifying some things and then you're making it out there so that becomes kind of a natural part of how you do things. So fantastic. What's the next topic? What's the next?
Okay. The next topic is, what distinguishes impulsion from compulsion. So when I say impulsion, of course, I mean as in like when you're impulsive or when you're impelled to do something. So in this case, we can think of, as far as like, I always like starting with similarities because I feel like the differences spring out once you have the similarities. So both compulsion and impulsion can be thought of as the regulation, it can be thought of as modes of regulating thoughts and actions. So how does this end up playing out in the world around us? Well, I would say that for one thing, impulsion is what we think of as rather, I guess the only word that's coming to mind at the moment is labial, but short-term sudden changes in volition. It tends to be, something springs up in your environment and you're impelled by it. Whereas and generally it's going to be brief, probably consumptive actions most of the time. I think most people, when they're following their impulses, it leads to rather simple, satisfying behavior patterns, and those tends to be simple consumption of food or society or something else in your environment that's going to give you a reward response that'll stop the behavior pattern. Because generally when you get the reward, you're done. And then that can reinforce following your impulses. So then you have, what are some of the downsides of that with impulsion? Well, for one thing, I would argue, and we can definitely discuss this, that impulsive thinking can reinforce stereotypes. That if you follow your impulses in the way that you process the world around you too much, you tend to just sort of make, you make this sum together of all of these really quick assessments of the world around you. And that can lead to an oversimplified view of people. And then also it just reinforces a really simple, quick way of processing how you evaluate other people around you. That can lead you to overuse stereotypes. I mean, there's a place for stereotypes in the world, but obviously it's not all the time when you're interacting interpersonally with people. And it can also reinforce addictions and dependencies. And again, what this comes down to is, like I was saying before, with impulsion, you're talking about things that are generally short-term, consumptive endeavors that have a quick reward. Oftentimes, those are small closed-loop processes that feed back on themselves, that reinforce themselves, can be easily pursued and continue to be carried out. And since as human beings, we crave stability and simplicity, something that's a nice, simple, oh, I go to the bar, I get the drink, I have the drink, I'm happy. I go to the bar, I get the drink, and it's a very easy way to get sucked into a behavioral cycle that's self-defeating, which we call an addiction. There's plenty of positive feedback loops that are not what we think of as addiction, but have the same qualities. But yeah, it partly depends on how you've been guided and what environment you're in as to when following your impulses is going to be a good thing, I would say. Now, on the other hand, we have compulsion. So again, there's kind of this blurry boundary between these two. It'd be pretty easy to argue that one is the other and the other is one in a certain situation. But what I would say is that when we talk about compulsion, whereas impulsion is kind of like the base of your brain and just kind of going with the flow, compulsion is often about swimming upstream. I would say that in a lot of cases, when you feel compelled to do something, it has to do with your long-term goal-oriented thinking that moves you along some sort of delayed gratification. And sometimes people can end up becoming obsessed with this. That's where you have obsessive compulsive disorder, is where you're getting so caught up in these models that we're very encouraged evolutionarily to have. I mean, delaying gratification is incredibly important to having a healthy, functional life. But then it gets to things where, like, something as simple as locking your door, which is sort of the delayed gratification for not having somebody break into your house. Because that's the idea, is that the delayed gratification for locking your door comes when someone tries to break into your house. But that people will lock the door multiple times in a row now because, oh, well, doing it once just doesn't feel good enough anymore. So I would say that, so whereas with impulsive behaviors, if we allow those to run wild, you end up falling into one sort of addiction. With compulsive behaviors, it's a different sort of, not what we think of as addiction, but I guess the word is obsession. We fall into an obsession with the future. We fall into an obsession with concerns about the things that we've been informed of that are supposed to impact our future, like the germs that are on the surfaces around us, and whether those will make us sick in the future. We feel compelled by things like that, and overall, like, obviously that's important. We do need to concern ourselves with germs. It's been a huge part of human progress, has been about us just being able to think better because we're not sick all the time. So obviously there's a place for compulsion in all of our lives. And another question that came to mind for me from this was regarding love, and whether love is compulsive or impulsive or both. And also hate, is that compulsive or impulsive or both? And I would say that for me, so obviously there's different types of love, and you could say different types of hate. And there is a question we have later that explores love in more detail, and we can get into that more with that one later. But what I would say is that probably they fall more along the lines of compulsion, that someone feels that love in a lot of ways compels us. And that's kind of its primary utility, is that there's some things that simply trying to gather extra information from our environment is not going to help us do, because they're things that are involved in a multi-generational process that's been selected evolutionarily for us to care for our children, to pursue a meaningful partner in our lives, and to survive, to avoid disease, to avoid extreme distress by simply not paying attention to the future. So yeah, I would say compulsion is that nudge that the world can't give you from your immediate surroundings. And sometimes we pay too much attention, sometimes we pay too little. I think, let's see here. So some quick, as an end to this one, I'm going to throw out some shotgun stuff that I had for strengths, and for the strengths and weaknesses of compulsion and impulsion. I'll just read these off quickly instead of expounding on them. So the strengths for impulsion, I said that it's spontaneous and creative. Its impulsion is adaptive and social, and it relies on instincts instead of cognition. And the strengths for compulsion are, it's tedious, which can be a good thing. So we need tedium in our lives. It's productive. Compulsion is consistent. It has potential because it interacts with the future. And it relies on cognition instead of instincts. And obviously these are all things that we could argue about down the line. It would be fun. And then as far as weaknesses goes, impulsion is short-sighted, it's unplanned, it can be maladaptive, just the same as it's adaptive. it can be gullible. It's the sort of short-sighted, myopic nature of impulsion means that you can be fooled and easily brought into something that's completely false. You can easily get into a false consciousness, basically. And it's self-reinforcing, which obviously can be dangerous with these feedback loops. And then as far as compulsion, I didn't get a lot down for this one, but as far as the weaknesses of compulsion, that it's risk averse, and that, again, it's repetitive and cyclical and can be self-reinforcing. So that's about it for that one.
Excellent. Derek, this is going to be a lot of fun because you put so many things on the table that it's going to be really, really good conversation. Thank you.
No problem.
What's the next room?
So the next one, and I believe the last one for today, is how does love interact with cognition? And I think it's a pretty good transition. I think Shrikant, I gave him a few different options, and I think this one did emerge because number 4 on my list was distinguishing impulsion from compulsion. Number 5 is how does love interact with cognition? Very organically flowed out of that one. So with this one of the things that I wanted to talk about first regarding love is attachment, because fundamentally what we could say is that love is an instinctually driven form of attachment. Obviously, that's a reductive way of putting it. There's a lot of higher definitions of love that you could draw from the humanities. There's a lot to be said there about sort of the Gestalt theory that, like, the combination of things that become love are not love itself. But I think it's very important to try to get down to the fundamentals. And fundamentally, it's about love is again, kind of like attention and intention. It's a glue. It's something that holds us together and draws us towards one another and encourage us and gives us the capacity to sacrifice for one another. And this is what comes to what attachment really is about. Attachment, especially for primates like us, for mammals that have a very long period of development for our children, and a very long gestational period for those children in the womb. You need to have a very deep and complicated form of attachment between people. So when I say that, what I mean is that we need to have a lot of ways in which we have a sense of attachment with our children, and we need a lot of ways in which we have a sense of attachment with the person that we love. And then also, that can extend out to our community, to our friends. But you could think of it as, in a way, that love is what modulates your willingness to invest in giving care to other people. That when you love someone, you want to care for them. You're compelled to care for them. And partly, oftentimes, it's because they're compelled to care for you. There's a reciprocity to it. So again, this is starting to get into how love can impact our cognition. I would say that in a lot of ways, it disrupts our cognition. So, for example, you could say that, and this is something that I think a lot of people arrive at when they think about love, is that love will make you do things that aren't exactly the best for number one, if you'll say. It's part of what love does is blast you outside of yourself and gives you, it's not really aspirational. It's intuitive, instinctual, deeply emotive, this desire to sacrifice for other people, to give to other people, to care for other people. And what this tends to do is disrupt thought processes that, if allowed to run completely rationally, would just lead to rather dystopian and myopic obsession with caring for the self, and kind of just distancing yourself from other people in just sort of like a cold, rational way. So basically what you could say is that it disrupts our priorities. It changes the way that we calculate the risk and reward in favor of others instead of in favor of ourselves. And the funny thing is that, at a higher level, you could say, well, really, that's what's in the best interest of you. That if you really tried to myopically care for yourself all the time, you're going to lose all of your social contacts. And then when you become ill, when you become old, when you become weak, and you don't have all those cold, rational processes to constantly guide you through life, that you're going to be the one who is now losing out, while everyone who is sacrificing for other people, continuing that culture of sacrifice, a culture of love, those people are the ones who, when they're older, when they're more vulnerable, are going to be able to recover better, quicker, become healthier, and over time, they're just going to have a net positive over you in their lives. So with that in mind, love changes the analysis of what is most beneficial. It disrupts our limited ability to really understand what's best for us. And it helps us make major life changes. So like accommodating our children, accommodating people in our lives that might take up our time in the now, but at the same time, there's something enriching even about just helping other people, and loving other people. It is profound the amount that you can learn about yourself by seeing how you respond to the way things happen when things happen to people that you love. I mean, that actually happened to me recently. Is there was a really huge crisis with my family this week, and it's still teaching me things about myself because I love someone, and something happened to them, and that can be a really deep and meaningful interface with yourself to watch how you're responding because you love. So it's, in a way, you could almost act like love is like the deepest and most true connection you have with the rest of the universe. So I'm starting to wax a little poetic here. Okay, so let's see, if we go along to a little bit of science from here. So there's been some research that's been done that showed that romantic love can reduce the pain of failure. Not failure with regards to your relationship, but if you have a relationship and it's going, it's not, there's not a whole lot of problems with it, then when you are struggling in other aspects of your life, when you're having other problems arise, they're much more tolerable for people that are engaged in a successful romantic relationship. So, and this makes sense that it would modulate our cognition this way, where we're more resilient to failure, because especially, in traditional, in the past, when things were simpler, the good old days, people would engage in a romantic relationship at a young age when there's a lot of risk-taking behavior involved in life, when you're trying to establish how you're going to contribute in a community, when you're trying to understand what your purpose is, in your community and in your life and with your friends and all that sort of stuff. And so the idea that you would want to have more emotional resilience, and also that, it makes sense that, like, as you get together with someone, that your emotional resilience could increase because you're going to be having children, and those children are going to have you're going to feel like there's a lot of failures and successes with them. And again, you're going to need some resilience to be able to deal with that. And that's where love comes in, is it can help soften all that. So, and let's see here. So as far as one last thing about love, so there's another type of love. So mainly what I've been talking about here is interpersonal love, familial love, romantic love. There's also the love of ideas. Some people might say maybe that's a form of idolatry, that, you're kind of expanding outside of the original purposes of something to fall in love with an idea, that an idea isn't going to love you back, that an idea will only serve you as much as you can serve the idea itself. But I still think it's an interesting thing to consider, in that we do have these ways in the world where, you know, like I love my computer. My computer has 3 screens. It's great for me to be able to multitask on things. It's simultaneously a workstation and an entertainment system and all different sorts of things. But at the same time, it's like, is that the same kind of love that would make me sacrifice for my computer? To some extent. I mean, if I was worried that the house was going to burn down, would I try to get out my computer? Well, gosh, it would be difficult, but maybe I would think about trying at least. So yeah, I would say, and this is the thing too, is like when you look at like cultural movements and the way that people think about each other and what they're capable of doing together, sometimes it's a common love of an idea, which is kind of what you could say that religion in a lot of ways is where everyone's agreed to love a specific set of ideas, to let those ideas be. Like I was saying, that love is sort of that connection between, the deepest connection between you and the universe, that people have agreed upon these ideas as that deepest connection to the universe. And that can be a tremendous motive force for allowing group cognition to occur with much less resistance and much more decisiveness, which is why I think religious thinking and religiosity has been something that has been so heavily selected for anthropologically, that just human beings and human civilizations have inevitably gravitated towards having a common belief system, because that's a way for them to all mobilize together quickly, especially back whenever we had limited communication technology and we just needed to get everybody on board because God wants it. And I think that is all that I have on love interacting with cognition.
Wow, that was fantastic. So this is just 4 incredible topics. So thank you very much, Derek. Now we are going to go into the breakout rooms. Now in the breakout rooms, we have got the 4 rules. You know, keep on topic, be brief, be courteous, and there will be facilitators in each of the rooms. Derek, let's give the other facilitators chance to choose their rooms. Mike has already chosen, has called love for the first round. Maritza, what's your choice? Oh, just a second. Hold on. I need to unmute everybody. Go ahead, Maritza.
I'll go with compulsion and impulsion.
Okay. Joe. Joe, you need to unmute.
I guess intention and attention. Actually, can I have a quick clarification on cognitive ethnography really quickly? Is it
afterwards?
Okay, all right. I just wanted to,
because everybody is ready to get to the breakout rooms and go into the.
All right, that works.
This one. So we'll do that. You know, after we come back. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So which one you take? Attention.
Intention and attention.
Intention. Okay. So Derek, you're on outsourcing this time. All right. Welcome, folks. Now we are kind of running short on time. So we're going to go directly into the lightning round, because I don't want to miss that. I want to hear what are the big questions on everybody's mind. All right, so let's start with that. So folks, what are the big questions on your mind that you're walking away with from all these discussions and the amazing presentation by Derek? Derek, it was fantastic, by the way. It was very crisp, very thought-provoking, and really, really good. All right, folks, so go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to put a question on the table. I'll collect all the questions, and then I will go ahead, we will organize the questions, and we will try to answer all of them. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share your questions. Maritza.
I have two questions.
Okay, go for it.
So looking at something that Derek mentioned, he said that attention feeds the model, intention is what comes out. How do we account for outside forces feeding that model instead of our internal cognitive self?
Oh, that's beautiful. So how does outside feed intention and attention? Is that fair way of saying that? Like
Yes.
instead of from inside. Okay, how does outside feed intention and attention instead of inside? Very good. And that actually connects with the outsourcing thought too. Go ahead.
Yes. I have a second question.
Yes.
So when we're considering compulsion, how does one know cognitively when it morphs from a healthy compulsion into an unhealthy, obsessive, in a negative way compulsion?
Oh, wonderful. How do you distinguish between healthy and unhealthy compulsion? Excellent. Thank you. Great questions. Jean, Joe, and Mike.
Yeah, my question is, I was in this laugh section, and I have this wondering. So I wonder if the romantic personal love, is that a way to teach us when they're young, with all the physical, like characters, to teach us a bigger picture about all kinds of more subtle, all kinds of love as a lesson, because it's very intense, physically involved. So that's as a way to help us learn bigger picture of love in general.
Wonderful. So is romantic love for the young a preparation or a means of discovering a wider, more complex aspects of love? Is that good? Okay, excellent. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Mike.
I have a feeling that this is something that like Derek's going to be able to answer yes or no, but if I'll just throw it out there anyway, as the idea of, again, this is the cognitive ethnography.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that relate to heuristics and decision making?
Okay,
or does it relate to heuristics and decision making?
Okay,
mental shortcuts.
Cognitive ethography. How does it relate to heuristics and what?
Well, heuristics, essentially mental shortcuts. But a question whether, just even if it does at all anyway.
Got it. Okay, very good. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, what's your question?
Is the common thread through all of these processes decision-making under risk, uncertainty, with imperfect heuristics and an imperfect computer making these decisions?
Okay, sorry, I lost you, sir. Can you please repeat?
Is the common thread through all of these components that we've been talking about decision-making under uncertainty,
Okay.
absurdity, risk, and with imperfect computers and imperfect heuristics and imperfect chemistry?
All right, so I'll shorten it with just is the common theme here decision making under uncertainty. So excellent. Anybody else wants to put questions on the table? Madeline, followed by Judith.
Okay, my question is, why do we frame questions about these things in terms of usefulness and not usefulness?
Okay, why is it in terms of usefulness and not usefulness? Okay. All right, next up is going to be Judith, followed by Mushki.
I guess my question, not very well formulated yet, but compulsion and impulsion, both seem to have an element of something that's not under 100% under our conscious thought control, the way other decision making may be. Well, maybe none is, but it definitely seems to have that feature that it specifically lacks a conscious component in our decision making to act that way. And like, how does that play out? I don't know. I can't finish my question.
Wonderful. I really like that. You're saying that the common element of both impulsiveness and compulsion is lack of conscious control. And whether there is something that is opposed to both these things together. So I think that's very good. Very good question. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mushki, followed by Phil. Mushki.
How can we apply our discussion of love and cognition to self-love?
Very good. Love and cognition to self-love. Okay, very good. Excellent. Phil, what's your question?
How do we construct a outsourcing system away from total efficiency to one in which retains a certain inefficiency that reflects a degree of uncertainty and irrationalism in the human being, rather than strictly a mechanical structure of efficiency?
Okay, wonderful. So how can we construct an outsourcing system which actually, instead of just efficiency, has room for the flexibility, uncertainty, which is part of human experience? Next up is going to be Goran. Goran, go ahead.
My question is, are human beings rational or rationalizing beings? Meaning, is what we call conscious decision making most or always just a rationalization for unconscious impulses and compulsions?
Okay, very good. Is there rationality or just rationalization? Okay, very good. Excellent. All right, so we have got great questions on the table. Now let's go ahead and try to answer them. Let's start with the first one. Let's try to see if there is any pattern here. So there is, on love, there are two questions. One is that how does this discussion of love and cognition apply to self-love, and whether there is kind of evolution of love, romantic love in the young becoming kind of a using the intensity in order to spread through kind of various varieties of love. So that was one on love. Then we got, is the theme, the common theme in this decision-making versus uncertainty, and we can connect it up with the outsourcing. I think the outsourcing is a very interesting theme. So outsourcing, efficiency versus allowing for the flexibility and uncertainty. We can also relate it to Maritza's question about how outside can feed intention and attention instead of just the inside. There is one on looking at compulsion in detail. There is, let me see what else. Usefulness not under conscious control. Okay, so I will combine the compulsion with the conscious control. And then we've got this one. Okay, so let's start with the outside and inside. So the question on the table for anybody who wants to answer it. Okay, so try to keep your answers very brief so we can go to as many, we can go through as many answers and as many questions as we possibly can. So how can you use outside to feed your intention and attention instead of it being fed purely from inside. So what is the role of the outside in shaping the intention and attention? So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer the question. Jean.
Yeah, I think that's how we learn about habit, forming habit. That's actually try to create an environment that focuses on our intention or attention instead of distracting it.
No, sorry, please, can you repeat? I got distracted.
Yeah, I think that's how we learn about habit. Basically, try to create outside environment to focus on intentional attention instead of distracting away from it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Derek.
So what I would say is that, so you have to remember that this model is entirely separated from the world around you inside of your brain, inside of your skull. This is one of those things where you can get in kind of the, whoa, life is really just a simulation. But it is one of those things where what's happening with attention. And so what I would say is that as far as how the outside is interfacing with you, that's happening through attention. And when I say attention, I mean literally just like your ability to fixate on and glue together perceptions in your environment. So that can be as fundamental as just being able to recognize what objects are in your environment and fixate on them long enough for that to become something that's a part of your model of the world. So what I would say is that if you're wondering about like how does the outside interface with us? Well, it's through our five senses. And in fact, it's why we have multiple senses. And really, we've got way more than five. Like there's like 6 different ways that we touch and feel. But yes, so I would say that it's through your senses and the perceptions of those senses getting glued together that the outside comes in and feeds into the model that you have of the world around you.
Wonderful. Anybody else on this question about outside feeding intentions and attention? Maritza.
So in one of the discussions that I was in, we were talking about how there are so many external forces now that they expressly target one's attention. So I understand that you're saying it's separate, but I find myself highly unbelieving that that can truly be achievable in today's environment, at least in this Western world. That there's so many little bombs being thrown at one that by the time we go to focus our attention, there's already so much marketing that is going to affect where that attention is placed. Do you not find this to be true?
So if I could respond real quick. So Maritza, when I go through the world these days, a tremendous amount of what I find myself doing is what an engineer would call cleaning out the noise. So it really is like for one thing, now that I can pause and restart just about anything except special moments like this where we're all with embodied people, it is one of those things where I've learned to become very detached from what I see in media, what I see in the environment, so that I can be able to assess it more clearly before I kind of let it in and let it impact me. Because it might just be a bunch of BS. It might be somebody just trying to sell me something. It might be something just trying to convince me of something for their own benefit. And so, yeah, I would agree with you that like the best way to go about things in this modern world where there's an attention economy that's constantly surrounding you of people trying to get your attention is to hone that concept of trying to find the signal in the noise, and also trying to hone the concept of, I would say being able to, gosh, I had it for a second. I guess I would just say being able to rapidly detach yourself from the things that you can tell are not contributing, are problematic, and and just not try to get too wrapped up into things until you realize, oh, no, this is worth committing to.
Wonderful. I want to add, we will go into the next question of outsourcing. How do you design
Right back.
outsourcing, which is not, I would say, not only efficient, but also leave space for growth. It leaves space for uncertainties or flexibilities. And I think outsourcing is a huge thing. Whether we like it or not, outside impacts us. So there is a continuous feedback loop happening between inside and outside. And it is, our environment and how we shape it affects us. That's what, for example, writing is about. When you outsource, put things outside, it impacts you. The way the people you interact with impacts you. And so all your attention, intention, etc., whatever strategy you want to come up with inside, you need kind of outside correlates in order to create like a feedback loops which support both what is going on inside and outside. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Phil. Mike, what do you think?
Well, again, looking at the common theme issue, the signal to noise problem is a pattern matching problem where you use some sort of autocorrelation scheme. Now that's not just in the neurons, that's in every single cell. The way the immune system works is kind with CRISPR-Cas9 technology is tied to matching and editing, matching a pattern, and the nature of the life is that it matches down even at the cells level, and compulsion, impulsion is that way. It yields to a series of heuristics for that pattern matching because you can't solve the equations in real time analytically, but you can, for example, how you hit a round ball with a round bat is a heuristic that works every time. How you fall in love is decision under uncertainty and risk management under absurdity and uncertainty.
Thanks, Mike. Next up is Phil, followed by Gene. Phil.
Yeah, I was unsatisfied with Derek's answer to this problem of advertising and all that sort of stuff, because it sounded very much to me like Aristotle's advice about aesthetic distance. The way to appreciate a theater is to have both a close-up and understand the feelings in the theater, but also be removed enough so you can see its relationship to life and that thing. But he's talking about a very specific situation, an aesthetic experience. To take that kind of filtering of distancing so you could understand the filtering process throughout life, it's just too exhausting. I don't think Aristotle expects you to be sitting on a play, experiencing aesthetic distance 24 hours a day. You just be exhausted. So therefore, there got to be something else that controls that process beyond just your personal effort in terms of filtering and creating that distance so you can make a rational judgment.
Next up is Gene.
Yeah, I actually think what the Stoicism we learned, which very helpful, is creating environment or avoid the seduction. Something is, if it's bad for you, just stay away from media if you think it's distracting. And also, because I give an example, like when you go shopping, if you go shopping, go there, you will definitely attracted by the advertisement. Just stay away from the mall. So I think that's maybe Stoicism's suggestion is a good way. You only, like when you're surfing, you only handle the wave you are capable of handling. Maybe Derry have a good surfer, so he can go to the wave and come out. And other people are not as good, so they stay in the smaller wave, keep the media like this at distance.
If I could, I actually finally remember what I was going to say, and I understand, Phil, why you were unsatisfied, because I was too. There was another thing I was going to say, which I finally got back in my head.
And Derek, let's keep the answer short so we
I'll
can
keep
go
it
through
short.
all the questions and everybody's comments on it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the other thing that I was going to say, Maritza, is that especially in terms of like online, which I feel like was a lot of what you were talking about, is just these phones we have in our pockets and everything. Something that's helped me become more functional in the way that I use something like Google and YouTube and the internet is that, well, I guess in a way it's you're looking through a glass darkly at yourself, and you're interfacing with an artificial intelligence that's trying to serve back whatever you give it. And so whenever I interface with YouTube, every decision I make, I think, how will this influence the way this algorithm thinks about me? And what I found is that as I do that, I try to engender more and more of a positive it's like you're having a relationship between yourself and the AI. And I think once you really grasp that in your head and you think about it that way, it can become much more constructive, and you can actually let your guard down sometimes and let the algorithm just run along and present you things because you've kind of trained it. So I would say take an active role in trying to train the algorithm to give you what you want.
Thank you. Next question is going to be on compulsion and impulsion. So there are two questions. One is, how do you distinguish between healthy and unhealthy compulsion? And the second question is that it looks like both impulsiveness and compulsion are not under conscious control. Is that true? And is there something else other than impulse and compulsion? So you can go ahead and talk about any of these. Joe.
I mean, I think I'll just give a very simplistic answer. The way you can determine whether it's good or bad is it causing you harm or not? I mean, essentially, in however you define what harm is in that particular instance. So, is the risk worth the reward that you're taking? That's the way I would answer it.
Excellent. So let's keep first focus just on that question. How do you distinguish between healthy and unhealthy compulsion? Anybody else? All right, let's take the other question. Goran,
I just have a very quick one. When I first heard that question, I was wondering, like, is there a healthy compulsion? Because by definition, I'm not using all of my faculties to make a decision. I'm not using my rational mind, I'm acting on some instinct so I would think any compulsion per se is unhealthy, at least in the process of making that decision to act.
Okay, next up is thank you, Goran. Next up is Phil, Jean, Derek, and Maritza. Phil.
I believe there are healthy compulsions. For instance, I have a compulsion to do art, and I judge it because it does positive work as far as I could determine, right? Whereas if I were doing something unhealthy, then it's just sort of like, maybe it's like for my pleasure, maybe it's like I'm trapped into something that I can't get out of. That would be unhealthy. So therefore, I think a healthy compulsion is actually good because it means that you're committed to something. But so you have to constantly judge whether that commitment is become exhausted or whether it continue to be productive in a positive way.
Wonderful. Jean, what's your answer?
Yeah, I agree with Phil, because I think when I design something, I really get into this healthy compulsion. I just cannot stop, maybe just keep doing. I think that's how we get things done, and it creates much more than we are capable of. And there's unhealthy compulsion, like sometimes I was obsessed with some YouTube video on this mystery what's his name? I was like, keep watching. I said, this is very healthy. So I'm sure there's healthy and unhealthy ones.
Wonderful. Derek, how do you distinguish between healthy and unhealthy compulsion?
Well, I would quote the Bible on this one. By their fruits shall ye know them.
Wonderful.
Just you've got to pay attention to the past and learn from it.
Excellent. Maritza.
I would say that yes, there are healthy compulsions. How to distinguish? I think if it becomes a disruptive force in one's life, would be perhaps a moniker that we're sliding from healthy into unhealthy territory.
Wonderful. So next question is on conscious control. Impulsiveness is lack of conscious control. Compulsion seems to be kind of mixed to me. It's like some of it is under conscious control, some of it is not. So what is the relationship between conscious control and impulsiveness and compulsion? Anybody, go ahead and type exclamation mark. So what's the role of conscious control in when you look at impulsiveness or compulsion, both the healthy and the unhealthy kind? Goran.
Here I am. Well, there is this theory that our behavior is by and large run by our unconsciousness, and our conscious choice is kind of an illusion in a way, because it just justifies what we feel like doing unconsciously anyway. So that's just one viewpoint worth kind of like self-observing or exploring in order to get more freedom. One time that I would argue there is a conscious control if it's purely engineering mathematical decision. And I have a decision tree and then I calculate and okay, that's that. But any other thing in life, what I'm going to have for lunch, who I'm going to call on the phone, you know, those are all unconsciously driven behaviors in my kind of like perception and understanding.
Thank you. Next one, let's answer the question that that Joe brought up about cognitive ethography. Derek, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. So actually, if you look into the research of cognitive ethnographers, in a lot of cases, what they'll do is they'll create diagrams that will show you how different heuristics are playing out in like certain work environments and how they're being scaffolded by technology and objects in the environment as well, and also by the relationships and the hierarchies that also are scaffolds for cognition that we have in terms of like how people are being managed. So if you look into it, like they'll have everything from like how people communicate and what sort of like specialized linguistic artifacts are being used and abbreviations and jargon and stuff like that, all the way down to like a step-by-step timeline of like a very specific interaction between two people in a certain work environment and like trying to dissect everything that's going on in that particular situation. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of like diagrammatic mapping out of these different dynamics that occurs.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek. I want to relate it to the other question that Phil had asked about outsourcing efficiency. When is the outsourcing too efficient? When is it that it doesn't leave space for growth, for uncertainty, for flexibility, for human messiness? So what is the ideal of outsourcing in terms of efficiency and or dealing with order and chaos? So go ahead if you have any thoughts about that, of outsourcing, how it applies to outsourcing of any kind. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Phil, what's your answer?
Well, my answer is I used to teach typography as a very, very subtle discipline because it's supposed to be very efficient. But a good typographer, a good type designer, always design a degree of inefficiency in it, inconsistency, I should say, to, in a sense, to create the ability for you to get a kind of a toehold and a respite in the system so you don't become exhausted even in the reading process. So in the old days, for instance, with the with printing, because the letterpress was imperfect, it leaves these little squishes that are irregular enough that it actually creates a kind of more human inviting texture that's more like a natural world. But with digitizing, it's become so slick that a good designer actually have to design a degree of imperfectness to create a kind of welcoming to the situation. It's kind of like free solo. The guy has to find the holes in the mountain in order to get the finger hole, because if you don't have, if it's totally slick, you just can never climb the mountain.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Jean.
Yeah, I think efficiency will give you less space to growth. So people usually outsourcing only the things they don't like. For example, like if you don't like cooking, you can outsourcing cooking. But if you love cooking, you will never outsourcing that. If you don't like take care of kids, you can outsourcing that. Like for me, I outsourcing drafting because I like design. I don't like drafting. So outsourcing that part. I think at that part, I will lose something, but you have to pick and choose. It's 20-80. You know, I think you only focus your 80% energy on the only thing you love. The rest of the thing you just do 20, get 80 result because time is limited.
Wonderful, thank you. Derek, what do you think?
So as far as efficiency goes, oh my gosh, I had a good thought and then I got distracted by the chat logs. Could you repeat the question one more time? The exact question is...
The question is, how do you design outsourcing, not just for efficiency, but keeping room for the flexibility, uncertainty of
Okay. So something that comes to mind for this is, I'm just going to tell a little story and it'll be quick. It's a story from the Soviet Union regarding planned economies. Because I think that you want to talk about obsession with efficiency, you could talk about the Soviet Union very easily as one of exhibit A of the bad examples. One of the things, and this is something that just blew my mind when somebody said it, is if you're a central planner, how do you arrive at the point where you allocate resources for making baby dolls? So the question is, it's like, this is what happened in the Soviet Union, is that you get someone down, you're like, okay, we want to allocate resources. Should we allocate them to making industrial equipment or children's toys? And they always chose children's toys. And you'd have all these babushkas running around and there's nowhere they could find to buy a toy for their grandchildren because nobody's making these toys. But the thing is that, you know, obviously toys are ways that children play pretend, which is how they grasp concepts in the world around them. And it's very essential, but it isn't efficient. And so I think that really love is probably where it fits in. Love, again, is what disrupts that obsession with rationalizing and efficientizing, whatever you want to call it, the world around us, and allows us to sacrifice efficiency for the better of everyone in ways that we can't really even communicate, let alone fully comprehend, I would say.
Okay, from everything I know about the Soviet Union, it has neither the efficiency nor the flexibility nor the ability to deal with uncertainty. So it's something like it's like, you know. So anyway, the next up is going to be Phil. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment about the Soviet Union in that sense. In 1992, I attended a conference, a graphic design conference. This former Soviet artist, who's a very good artist, said that working in the corporate world was more difficult than in the Soviet Union against the KGB. And that really lit my light like, wow, like something that's even more oppressive than the KGB. Because with the KGB, you could go underground. With the corporate world, they keep nagging at you. They want what they want and all that. Is so suddenly you have to kind of give up or just like get fired. And that's all you have. So in a funny way, we have an efficient world that's much more efficient than the Soviet Union.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to take the questions about love. So the first question was the question that that Jean asked about, the romantic love in young is tremendously passionate, but more focused. Is that a preparation for love of a much wider scope? So what is the relationship between love amongst young, romantic love amongst young, and love as such across lifetime? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to answer. Joe.
I mean, I would just say that it is more of an instinctual love at a younger age, more impulsive love that grows into something that is more wise. So that as you're appreciating more about the abstract and then what the higher levels of love. And I think this kind of relates back to the caregiving aspect example that we're forgoing. We're giving something up that is not in our best interests, but in the long run, there's a payoff for the example that Derek was talking about, that there's this something there at the end that essentially that manifests itself in a different way. I mean, that would be the way I would just describe it, is that it starts off as somewhat of as an impulsive love, and then it manifests it into more of a, and this is the ideal, I'm saying, is that not everybody necessarily, I'm sure, gets there. So anyway.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Goran.
I just want to mention one element, like if love is positive regard, like wanting that the object of my love be well and be better and thrive. So that two primary biological elements of that is protection and nurturing. So like if I have a romantic partner, I want to protect them and nurture them because they help me carry my genes down the line. Same thing for a child. You want to protect and nurture a child for the same reason. And then if I love an idea, I want to do something to help that idea spread and blossom, So, and that's common for all loves. If I love humanity, I want humanity to prosper and people to be happy, right? So there is a common element that, practicing one part of love, like practicing romantic love, helps me practice my nurturing and protection skills, which then applies when I try to love humanity or something.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you, Goran. Next up is Jean.
Yeah, I actually wonder, I think I have this observation, like when people are young, they can sacrifice everything for love. Romeo and Juliet is a typical story of that. They can give up their life. But as people get older, they tend to more conservative. I know a lot of people, they will not make big change to change themselves to adapt to another person. They will give up much less. I wonder if that actually is a natural design, because when they need human to continue the genes, they need them to be crazy in love to create the next generation. So that's how human was engineered. They have this concept of love. embed in your brain so we can continue the human genes. As you get older, you don't have that function anymore, so they don't need you to be. So for you, the survival is more important than creating the next generation, crazy in love. So that's why people are more concerned about themselves than fall in love with crazy, give up everything to fall in love.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jean. Next up is Derek.
So to build off of what you were saying, Jane, and it was something that kind of came up whenever I was talking. I was speaking extemporaneously, so it'll come out different now, is that a lot of what love seems to do with is caregiving and sacrifice for other people. There is the more powerful romantic love that comes initially. But I would say that even as you grow older, even as you look to yourself, there is the people that you've established these strong relationships with, these loving relationships with. They're there to sacrifice for you, and you're still there to sacrifice for them in ways that morph and evolve, I would say, as you get older. And a lot of what older people are doing is intergenerational knowledge transfer, I would say, is a lot of it. And showing young people how to sacrifice and explaining what it is. It's an interesting thing. Anyway.
Yeah, I want to chime in. I think the difference is young people sacrifice to the things that know. A person they have no idea of. The older people only sacrifice for people they already know for years. They know they have reward, so they already know for sure. So older people, they will not fly. Like I tried to introduce a guy to a Chinese woman, and he was excited. She's very pretty, and then after that they think all the other things, then they give up. If he's 20 years younger, he will fly over. That's the difference. You know what you're talking about. It's not like you're not sacrificed. You don't sacrifice for things. You take less risk.
Yeah, risk aversion does go up with age, for sure.
Yeah.
Phil.
Yeah, it's hard for me to talk about it at a personal level in terms of a relationship to another, but I could certainly talk about it in relationship to art. I think when you're young, I'll use not age, but a young, undeveloped love, it's really a projection. The other is really an object matter. There's an art term in which you project the feeling of love. So you're more romantic, you love itself, and they become an object that in a sense you pin and project this condition onto. I think as you get more mature, what happened is the other becomes a real thing, and that the otherness becomes a subject rather than an object. It's no longer an object matter which you pin something on, becomes a subject in which you relate to the subject itself. I think that is actually treating the other person as an equal and a subject in which you have a relationship with. And in my case, is art itself. So it becomes a subject, not an object.
Wonderful. I want to bring in, two thinkers. We try to do this syntopical thing. One is Aristotle, and second is Martin Buber. Aristotle talks about, friendships of pleasure, utility, and character. And they actually, they have very powerful ways of looking at what is going on in your relating. There are things that you get pleasure from, which is kind of shorter range. Then you got things that are utility, which is slightly longer range than that. And then there is character, which is much more persistent. Martin Buber talks about the distinction between the I-thou relationship or I-you relationship, where you're actually trying to relate to the other person as a human being, as a you, and you are also participating in that as I, as whole of you from your core, versus, what he calls I-it, I like to call me-it relationship, where you're looking at only one aspect of that relationship. It would be categorized as either kind of pleasure or utility, that you're trying to get something specific out of that. And you also look at yourself as participating in that transaction, as somebody who wants something, as opposed to who you really are. And Martin Buber talks about kind of continuous fluctuation that we go through between one and the other, between the I, thou, and I, it relationships. So very much relates to, these are very powerful concepts to talk about here. Let's see. Are there any questions that are remaining that I would like to hit here? Madeline was asking, why are we talking in terms of usefulness and not usefulness? I'm a little bit puzzled by that question. Do you want to elaborate? Let's see, Madeline.
Sure, I'd be happy to elaborate. Usefulness, we're talking about things in evolutionary terms. We're talking about behaviors that benefit us as individuals at different stages of life or don't benefit us. We're talking about, so everything we're talking about, and it's not just Derek's presentation, it's much of how things get discussed these days, is framed in terms of evolutionary fitness, or what can we do with this thing? How is this benefiting me? How can I use it, or how is it working against me in terms of my functionality or cultural functionality? It's hard to explain. It's such a big question that it actually encompasses everything we're talking about.
You're saying that, we are talking in terms of values. You're trying to say, is this useful for achieving something? And what would be the alternate way of talking about things?
Well, that's, I was hoping to hear from other people on that.
Okay, so I don't know. I don't know. I think we're always looking at, we are living beings. We're pursuing values. We're trying to, saying, okay, what is my function? What is it that I need to do? I need to be, and everything is evaluated in. At least I evaluate everything in context of that, and I don't know what else would you do. So Derek.
So this kind of gets down, you mentioned it in what you were saying, Madeline, that there's kind of this evolutionary framework for viewing this sort of thing. And I believe, whether you want to call it evolution and can it get Darwin involved in any of this, or you just want to call it natural selection, fundamentally at every level, there's selection occurring among competing things in some sort of arena, at the conceptual level, at cultural levels, at interpersonal levels, even at the molecular level. Like, the reason that there's more iron than boron in the universe is because iron survives in the core of stars better than boron. So it's like, even at the most fundamental level, things are here because they're better at being here than the things that aren't. And that to unravel the why of something is in part to reverse engineer that selective process and understand why something has come about to be here.
Thank you. Last question. What is the relationship between self-love and cognition? We've talked about love and cognition. What about self-love and cognition? What is the relationship between that? Anybody who wants to answer can type an exclamation mark. Derek.
I don't mean to dominate, but I do have something for this. Is I would say that sometimes, so this is an important thing about just the way that I think about myself as a neuroscientist. I don't really think of myself as a single entity. I strongly believe in myself as this conglomeration of trillions of little entities that are working together, and that there is a gestalt me, this part, this me that's the combination of all those things. But it's very easy for that illusion to break, for me to fragment into multiple minds, to be of multiple opinions about the same thing. And I've become very comfortable about that by conceiving of myself as not just one thing. I'm a bunch of things. And so when you talk about self-love, what I would say is that in a lot of ways, how we learn to interface with other people, well, we become other people as we move through time. And even as we divide in mind and thought on different issues, we split apart into different entities within ourselves. And we have to learn to love ourselves the same way we have to learn to love other people. And we have to learn to love ourselves by in part bringing out our virtues, is what I would say. And being able to see the fruits of our labor build ourselves up in life, I think, is a really important part of that.
Wonderful. Jean, you're next.
Yeah, I wonder, because I think self-love is pretty natural. So I don't quite understand why people don't have that. So because I actually wondering, it's more about acceptance when you grow up. If you grow up in a loving family, or maybe it's more about how strong your mind is, because I grew up with the same as my two siblings, and I seems to be fine. My sister seemed to be victimized by my mom. So I think, I'm not sure. I think it's more about how you form your view of life. So you have this strong idea of who you are. And I think the confidence is about when you know your pros, know your strengths and weakness, you know full about yourself. So nobody can attack you anymore. So people laugh at you. So yeah, that's me. So they admire you. Oh, that's me. So you accept who you are. Then that's self-love, I think. That's how I think when I learned the EQ, they talking about know yourself, know other people, know your relationship. That's all EQ about. Once you have that understanding of yourself, then you have the self-love, because you know you're not perfect, but that's fine. That's who you are.
Wonderful. Thank you. I mean, I want to build on that a little bit. I think this kind of the notion you have of yourself is critical, and it kind of shapes a lot. Like kind of this basic self-acceptance and that basic serenity. If you have that core, I think you can do a lot more than you. And partly it is kind of self-acceptance. Not, I think of it kind of mostly as acceptance, and love is kind of an aspect of it. So you can feel free to actually say, you know what, I screwed up there. I really don't like this thing about me, but there is a level of kind of self-acceptance that you are what you are. That's all you really have to start with. And you try to do the best you can. So it's kind of, it's kind of combination of acceptance, which which leads to, on one hand, humility, and on the other hand, kind of pride or love. But it's all kind of based on acceptance. And I think that's a very good position to be in to do cognition, because it's not, I mean, there is a part of it where you kind of are so full of yourself that you can't see other things. You get caught up in whatever ideas that you're produced, or whatever your impression of yourself or persona of yourself is. And that's something that you have to watch out for. But I think I always think of self-acceptance as the starting point for kind of good cognition. Next up is going to be Goran, followed by Phil.
I heard the story about Dalai Lama. Somebody asked him a question about self-hatred. He was like perplexed and confused, like, why in the world would any human being hate themselves? And I think it's very much cultural. And our feeling about ourselves, self-love, self-acceptance, all self-hatred, self-loathing, is internalized, what we got from our parents when we were very young and vulnerable and, just accepting. And in American culture and Western culture in general, there is a very common this idea that you are never good enough. You have to keep improving. You get one B, and that's not good enough. And so there's this sense in many people in this culture that of not being good enough and feeling bad when I make a mistake or when I'm not perfect or something. So it's internalized parental attitude, basically. And cognition comes in understanding how that works, helps then devise techniques, methods, and strategies to retrain, recondition that potential self-hatred and stuff, and increase self-acceptance.
Wonderful. All right. So, Phil, I'll give you the last word. We have to wrap it up very soon because at 12 o'clock, everything turns into pumpkins, I think.
Well,
Go ahead.
well, like the infinite is always important, and how the infinite reveals itself is through making the invisible visible. That's what I'm really most concerned with. Unfortunately, even though in some sense other people could get it, the invisibility becoming visible can only be experienced in a singularity, which is yourself. You could tell others about it, but the experience itself is singular. So therefore, if you don't value the singularity of who you are, you can never experience, nothing could be experienced about the infinite or the invisible. So therefore, the self or the singularity of oneness is necessary for the invisible to show itself. So therefore, that is actually beyond you, self, as a kind of egotistical thing. It is about this relationship between the awe of the infinite and the invisible showing itself, because it only show itself to an individual.
That's wonderful. Actually, my friend Yasuhiko was here, and he was making a very interesting point that in the East, see, I'm from the East, you or Jean are from kind of East, or kind of at least Eastern and influenced. Like for the East, the core idea is that of self-realization. And that's a very natural way. Whereas like a West starts with wisdom of the outside world. So it's kind of moves outside in, whereas East tends to move kind of inside out. And so kind of naturally thinks of kind of self-realization, kind of having that base in self, focus on consciousness, focus on all of that is very prominent in the Eastern thought. West is very good, it's superb at dealing with the external world by far. I mean, it's just, we've had the Industrial Revolution, all of that we owe to the West. But I think East kind of starts with the core of the person more. I can speak for the Indian thought. That is huge. I mean, the entire kind of meditation tradition, idea of saying, centering, starting with that. So that's a huge thing. So great point, Phil. All right, folks. Derek had to leave, but Derek did a fantastic job. I was very, very impressed. And I think this format works very well, where we put things on the table, then go discuss them in small groups. And then we come back and, talk about this. Phil, what are you laughing about?
Well, I'm just thinking of the word disgust. I am disgusted. I don't mean that, but that's the word you use.
Wonderful. Mushki, go ahead.
I just want to say, have a childlike mind and then love yourself like you'd love a child.
Yes, that's very well put. And on the theme of that, we are going to be talking about that for the entire meetup. We're doing a meetup on Jacob Branowski's last episode of Ascent of Man. It's called The Longest Childhood. And Phil, I'm sorry you can't make it. You're going to miss it. But yeah, I think I'll send you the video as soon as I have put it up on YouTube. It's incredible. I mean, that is the whole argument of Jacob Branowski, and that is the 13th episode, which is culmination of his look at the entire Ascent of Man. And his point is that what characterizes human beings is the long childhood. It is the plasticity. It is the curiosity. It is the, it is being open to the world, to keep changing, not take everything that has been done as given, but be willing to play with it, a sense of play, which is there in all the great minds. So that's what we'll be talking about. That's going to be on Sunday at, I think, 7:30, if I mistake not, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. So don't miss that. All right. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank
See
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.